So I want to thank everybody again for joining this morning. And I just wanted to make a couple comments before I introduce Mayor Gama. The purpose of today is really to provide the most up-to-date information on dredging and beach replenishment efforts in the region, but also to stimulate your thinking about the need for regional sediment management. Yes, this is a Ventura Sand Summit, but we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Patch later. And Beacon is a regional agency of the 2 counties of Santa Barbara and Ventura, and the 6 coastal cities extending from Goleta all the way to the city of Port Hueneme. And we see that one of our roles is to educate all of us about the both the science of regional sediment management, but also about the governance and the politics of it. And so today's just one opportunity to provide the best information we can, and then to stimulate some discussion of how do we move forward to ensure that the sand that we need is available, and that we can logistically and through governance mechanisms actually see it delivered. So with that, I'm going to actually hand over the controls to Mayor Gama and introduce Stephen Gama, formerly City of Port Hueneme City Council member and now mayor elected by his peers. And Stephen represents the city on the Beacon Board of Directors and has been a strong presence on the Board of Directors. So Stephen, you should be able now to share your screen.
Okay, I click on share screen, right? Boom.
Yep.
Host disabled participant screen sharing. So
you are the host, I believe. Let me go back and make sure that you are. So I have you as the host now. So let's see if you can do that again.
it says when I click on it, host has disabled. Let me try it. Okay. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Well, that's an interesting
I know,
instruction to me.
We walked through
We've been
this
through
earlier.
this twice already.
Worked perfect.
Yeah, it did work. So let me see how we do this correctly.
You can click on the share screen button on your screen. There'll be a little small arrow on the right hand side of that button, and there'll be options, and then you can click there to enable host participant sharing.
I think I did that. So Todd, thank you for helping me do that. So I apologize for the logistical problems here.
So while he's working that out, I do want to say that I'm going to use pictures, because pictures are worth 1,000 words to tell our story about sand in Port Hueneme. And when we get to the PowerPoint that I put together, I want you to visualize a grain of sand, and visualize that grain of sand coming down the Santa Clara River and being discharged south of the river on the beach. And those grains of sand have a process to make it down to the sand trap and eventually around the corner to Hueneme Beach. And I think the photos that I've assembled are really going to tell that story really nicely. And I have it timed out so that it's going to last 5 minutes and 13 seconds for each slide. And I'm going to try and speak real quickly and tell the story of how the sand comes out the Santa Clara River, finds its way to the sand trap, and eventually finds its way to the city of Port Hueneme. And with that, let's try this again. It's still disabled. If you want it, Mark, maybe you could just pull it up from the Dropbox and start it.
Well, let me try to do that. And my apologies to everybody.
Mark, you may have a button that says security at the bottom. And if you see where it says security and you push the little arrow, you should see enable screen share.
I don't see the security button, and I was looking for the instructions on my screen, actually. So I apologize to everybody for being unable to follow this through. I'm not sure why my screen doesn't, oh, is that?
My screen actually says Samantha is the host.
And my screen says Stephen is the host, so there we go. As Stephen says, though, let me see if I can do this. I'll be able to get his up, but then I'll have to actually let's see. So
also
I
see
have-
Samantha as the host.
You do?
Yeah.
Well, let me see if I can get her out of host function.
Yeah, it says same on my screen.
Yes, Mark. So what you can do is you can have Samantha make you the host. And then once you're the host, you can enable participants to share their screen.
There, will you do that, Samantha? My apologies. I don't know how you became host, but okay.
Absolutely. I don't know either. Hold on for 1 second. Let me see if I can switch that around for you.
Thank you very much.
We're all here for you, Mark. No worries.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It takes
You're
many
very
people
calm
to
under
help.
pressure too.
You know, I've had 4 kids, so this is nothing. So Samantha, are you able to,
I think I just made
now
you.
you've made me the host.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see if I can redo this with Stephen. Make Stephen the host, change host to Stephen.
Oh, it says you are
Now
the
you're
host
the
now.
host. You are
Okay,
the
here we
host
go.
now.
We're going to share my screen. How's everybody see that?
It should take a minute.
Everybody sees my
You're
screen?
coming up. Yes, you are coming up.
There we go.
Here we go.
You are the man. Okay, let's get started. Like I said, I want you to visualize a grain of sand, and we're going to take a little trip down the coast to the sand trap and then to the city of Port Hueneme Beach. Okay, and here we go.
Slideshow.
If you go to
So-
slideshow, Steve, there you go.
All right, so think of the Santa Clara River as a conveyor belt delivering sand. You can see a nice even distribution of sand from the river mouth all the way to the sand trap at Channel Islands Harbor. This is a different view. The Channel Islands Harbor was constructed to trap the sand. You could actually see the nearshore southern flow of sand as it migrates down south to collect at the sand trap. Prior to the installation of the Port of Hueneme, you can see there was a uninhibited flow of sand south. And you can see the large sand dunes that accumulated prior to the construction of the Port of Hueneme. If no dredging occurs, this is what happens in the lack of sand at the Hueneme Beach, and this was in 2013. While that was happening, there's plenty of sand at the other side. This is at Oxnard Shores. You can see there's plenty of sand, and so while dredging is occurring, the sand, I'm lost on my slide here. Anyways, so at Oxnard Shores, they have to, maintenance crews regularly have to remove sand to keep the road clear. And then while that's occurring, over on the other side at the Port of Hueneme rock revetment, the port has to take defensive actions to shore up and protect its infrastructure from the ocean. These picnic areas were lost in the disaster of 2012. The funding has remained stable. However, inflation and costs have risen sharply. The experts determined that 1.2 million cubic yards of sand is needed to be bypassed each year in order to mimic Mother Nature and keep Hueneme Beach stable. The accumulated deficits led to today's slowly disappearing Hueneme Beach. And you can see what it looks like when all the sand was removed. Naturally removed by the erosion. Now down in Point Magoo, they have to take defensive actions over the last 20 years, and they've had this rock revetment expanding in order to protect the infrastructure at Point Magoo. And so this was the beginning of the dredge cycle at the entrance of the Port of Hueneme. You can see this is after 2 days and the sand's starting to build up rather nicely. This is what it looked like after 1 million cubic yards of sand. Halfway through the cycle, remember they moved approximately 2 million cubic yards of sand. So this is what we call the sand scar. You could actually see the leftover deficit of sand, and this is present today, and this was taken at the end of the cycle. This was before the end of the 2021 dredge cycle, and you could see this is what 1 million cubic yards of sand looks like, and you can see that there's still another million cubic yards of sand that needed to be deposited. So the sand scar has negative consequences for the city of Port Hueneme. You can see that our lifeguard stations are positioned farther than we would like them to be, and that impacts life safety. This is what we would hope our beach could get back to, where we have a nice, even amount of sand on a beach with no scar that creates what we call Hueneme Lake. This was taken at the end of the cycle this year, and you could see that that deficit is still present, and that deficit accumulated over the years. Also during this season, the port was deepening their harbor, and they're using a clamshell operation, and they were depositing 386,000 cubic yards of sand, which is the near shore deposit, so it doesn't go directly on the beach. So if you take the dredge project and the deepening project, we got to 2,386,000 cubic yards of sand, which is a little bit less than what we need. This is what it looked like at the completion of this year's dredging cycle. And if you look at the bottom right corner, you'll be able to see when you look at the next slide that we have made up ground. This is what it looked like at the end of the 2019 dredging cycle. And so we did make up some ground. We have additional sand. However, the sand scar is the area that we haven't been able to get back to normal. So hopefully that was stimulating and describes the process for sand getting around the Port of Hueneme, because it used to come naturally, and when the port was installed, that was no longer possible, and it had to be done manually. And so so hopefully we can begin to think about maybe a different way to mimic Mother Nature and keep the beach of Hueneme nice and stable with a nice flat beach all the way to the water's edge. Thank you. I stopped sharing.
We probably need to make Mark host again. Or
How do I do that? Let's see here. Okay.
you're muted, Mark.
There you go. So Steve, can you return it to me, return the controls to me? I think you can just press on your name, and it just should say, or we can have Samantha come over to you and help you out.
I'm at screen share, and it doesn't give me advanced sharing options or multiple participants. How's that?
I think if you go to participants, you should see the
Yeah, just go to
participants
participants.
on the right, and you should be able to make Mark the host.
So Stephen, do you see the icon for participants? If you click that on, then you'll see, you can shift it back to me.
I do not see that. I'm stuck in screen sharing mode, display settings, and
Down at the
But
bottom.
click off screen share and just click on participants and you'll be able to share back.
what happened here? Now I'm in post attendee.
So unclick host.
No, he's not on the right screen.
Unclick your screen share
I did.
Down
and
at
click
the,
on participants. Go ahead, click on participants.
Down at the bottom of the
And then
screen.
you should be able to relieve me back to host.
Click on your name, Stephen. And it'll show you.
Can you click on your name?
When you see participants?
No, I don't.
Okay. Do you go down to the bottom of your screen and does participants come up and say 41 people? Just sort of slide your cursor down.
yes, push that Zoom icon all the way at the bottom
Yeah.
on the right where you were, push that. You see where it says meeting controls?
Yes.
I think you can push, so click where it says Zoom, yep. Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
That's not it.
There's meeting
There.
controls.
Can you stop the screen share on that one? Or click participants?
I can't
Yeah,
see
stop.
it.
I can't see it.
It's so tiny
Yeah.
But you can see stop screen share, Stephen, I believe,
right there.
where the green button is. Right there. Go up right there.
Did it do it? It's, sorry guys.
That's okay.
I
Don't
see
worry
it.
about it.
I'm on it.
I think you want the red part. I can't really read it, but does the red part say stop screen share?
I think so.
Yes, do that.
It's very tiny though.
Now, as Kiki said, you should go to see participants and click on the participants where it says 41 at the bottom of your screen. And then you should be able to assign me host. Return host.
Okay. Stop share. Hey, I did it.
Okay, you're still the host.
I'm still,
You're still the host though. You have to click on your name and then rename me as host.
In the participant box.
Yeah. Okay, I got. So we want to rename Mark Baylor as
Technical.
host. Okay, so
Thank you for your patience all.
there it is. Done.
There I am.
Good, besides that?
Yeah, that's it. It only took 5 minutes, but that's my bad.
We're all
And now
learning.
I'm gonna
We're all learning.
So if I have the speaking role, we have the real pleasure and honor of having Dr. Kiki Patch join us this morning. She's associate professor at Cal State Channel Islands Environmental Management Department and very experienced and prominent in the field of sediment management and sediment processes, and has spent a lot of her time in the region studying sediment, fate, and transport. I'm going to make Kiki the host.
Oh, no.
And
Now I see Kathleen as the host.
Kiki,
get out
how,
of here.
Kiki, did you like my presentation? I'm always looking for feedback.
I did. It's a perfect setup. It's absolutely the perfect setup for what I'm just about to talk about. So,
So
our
Kathleen, I don't know how you became host, but can you please return the host function?
Are you talking to
That's
Kathleen
crazy.
Gavin?
Gavin, yes.
Kathleen Gavin, yes.
I've become host. Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Um,
You just want to go to participants.
participants, yeah, I'm trying that. Hold on.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
It's like host popcorn down here. So you should be able to click on participants and see everyone's name.
So weird. I'm on Zoom all the time and I've never had this happen. So give me a moment here. Okay, I'm going to
Hey,
participants.
I've never had this happen either.
Yeah, just, okay. And do I go to my name? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yep, go to your name.
Yeah. And Okay. So at my name, what do you want me to do?
We want you to relieve yourself of host or make me host. Just go down and
It's not giving me that as an option. Let me look under more here. How bizarre. Yeah, it's not giving me an option of not being host.
Slide over, Kathleen. Slide all the way over. It should say on your name.
Of course, it's being
You
very-
maybe
not
if
paying
you maybe
attention.
hover over Kiki's name, there should be a
Yeah.
blue button that comes up, and then you can click that blue button, and then you can assign as host.
On
That
the
should be
participants list.
on the participants
Yes.
list, and hover over Kiki's name.
All right, I'm looking for Kiki's name.
so you just scroll down to her name.
Yep, I'm scrolling.
Yeah, she's right below Jack Malone. She's just down below you.
I see it. Okay. Hover over her name.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah.
should see it says more.
Yes.
Does it give you the option to make me the host?
Hold on.
Click on more.
Yep, I'm on the make host. Got it.
Yep, make host. Thank you.
Did
Oh,
that
now
work?
it says Brian Brennan is the
Oh
host.
my God.
Brian.
So
you
this
gotta
is
make
not,
Kiki the
this
host.
is not, so this is interesting. This is not a problem of us. This is a problem of the controls somehow. Because
So
I
Brian,
click,
Another option you can do is, Brian, you can set anyone to present. And then
I
when
was
you
just going to
switch
say that
into-
under the security tab, you should say allow screen share. Allow participant screen share.
Kiki, what's the weight of a grain of sand?
Well, what size of a grain of sand?
Like a
Fine
little one.
grain, medium grain.
Oh, so there's different categories.
Brian, you are
Grain.
muted. Brian, you are muted too.
Thanks, Mark. I saw that. Yeah.
So you should be able to do the same thing. You should be able to make Kiki the host.
That's what I'm going to.
Oh, I might have screen share. Can you guys see
There
my
she
screen?
is. Yeah.
That's right.
Good to go.
Yep, you have screen share.
Yay,
There
good
we
work,
go.
everybody.
All right.
Takes a village. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and get started. And actually, I was supposed to start at 9:30, so this is perfect. Thank you, everyone. And I don't think I've ever been queued up quite so well to start my presentation, so thank you. So yeah, I'm a professor at Cal State Channel Islands, and I basically look at how sand moves along the coast, and I've been doing that for almost 20 years now, which is crazy. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of the science. Here is an overview of what we're going to go over. How does sand move along the beach? So again, queued up so well. Imagine you're that grain of sand. I'm going to tell you how you move along that beach. We're going to talk about how the sand gets to the beach. We'll talk a little bit about sediment budgets. And then, as Mark said, I'm going to talk a little bit about regional sand management and what that means.
If others could mute themselves while Kiki talks, however. Sorry, Kiki.
No problem. Everybody hear me okay? Still seeing my screen? Okay, good. So how does sand move along the beach? Well, if you've ever been out to the beach, you've all seen those waves coming up on to the shore, smacking against the shore, breaking and going back out into the ocean. So they come up and back out. Well, each one of those waves is hitting the beach at a slight angle. So if you were to really stare at the water, you would see that very few waves actually hit the beach in a directly parallel way. They all come in at a slight angle. So as you see here, hold on, let me get my laser pointer. Can you guys see my laser pointer on there now? So as the waves come up, they're going to come up at a slight angle and then straight back down due to gravity. So the waves will push the sand up at an angle and straight back down. Here is an actual picture. These are huge waves. They're not usually this big, but the huge waves we had in January coming in around C Street. So you can see these waves coming in at an angle. So you can imagine them breaking on the beach at an angle and then going straight back down due to gravity. So what that does is it sets up a transport of sand that we call littoral drift. If you've ever been out here swimming, you have probably been caught in the longshore current. The longshore current moves the littoral drift, or that river of sand kind of running parallel to the coast. So if you think about that, you're like, okay, it's only picking up these tiny little grains and they're just moving a little bit every wave. But those sand grains don't have to move very far with every wave, because those waves are smacking the beach every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds, right? Every minute of every hour of every day. So if we were to just do some little math, I know everybody loves a little math equation, right? If you had a 5-second wave, and that is the period of a wave. So if you were to stand out here and count how many seconds it took until the next wave comes, that's called the period of the wave. So if you have a 5-second wave, that is 17,000 waves that are smacking against the shore, right, every day. And so those waves will come in with different periods. So if we just take a bit of an average, say we have 10,000 waves per day, and those sand grains only move 2 inches per wave. If we put all of that together, you're still moving that sand about 2,000 feet along shore every day. Now, of course, this is just an average because the waves will come in at different angles and those sand grains will move down coast a bit and then back up coast and down coast, just depending on the direction of the swell. So just to put that in perspective here, if we have sort of a littoral zone or this movement, this area of sand that's moving by the wave energy, say that's roughly 200 feet wide, and we have about an inch of sand that's moving about 2,000 feet along shore each day. That means we're moving about 30,000 cubic feet of sand a day. So if you were to average that out, that's about 365,000 cubic yards per year. And what we'll come to find out is these numbers actually match up really well with what we see being dredged out of our harbors. So if we look at California as a whole, this sort of zigzag motion of sand, right, under the influence of waves, moves sand predominantly down coast. So we get very big waves coming in from the northwest during the winter. Those strong energy waves move a lot of sand down coast for the majority of California. Then in the summer, we do get some south swell and west swell. So we'll have some sand go back up, but then a lot of sand come back down. Little sand move up, a lot of sand go back down. So we get this net transport of sand to the south. So we really started to understand this actually when we constructed the Santa Barbara Harbor. So we constructed the Santa Barbara Harbor, and just a few years later, we had some of the most extreme erosion in Carpinteria that we've ever seen. So engineers like, wait a minute, we got this nice big beach. What happened to all of that sand? And that's really when we started to understand how sand moves along the shore. So this brings up the idea of what we call a sand shed. You guys are probably pretty familiar with the concept of a watershed, or the area of land that's all drained by a particular river. Well, in California, we have this idea of a sand shed, also called a littoral cell or a beach compartment. And what that is it's a region of the coast where you can sort of see where all of the sand is supplied from. So you have all of the watersheds, right, supplying sand to this stretch of coast. So this sand shed or littoral cell has all of the sources, the sinks, it encompasses the transport and the storage of sand in this essentially like little laboratory. So in each one of those sand sheds or littoral cells, we can develop a sediment budget. So that sediment budget is going to help us understand all the sources of sand. So how much sand is provided by the rivers, how much sand is provided by sea cliff erosion, how much sand is provided by that onshore transport. If you guys, I'm sure you know that in the winter, our beaches get really narrow, and in the summer, they get nice and wide. And that's because of the on and offshore transport of sand. So these littoral cells really form the framework for our understanding of the sources of sand, as well as the sinks of sand. So for most of these sand sheds in California, or littoral cells, they almost all end at a submarine canyon. So we have all of this sand moving along the coast, again, mostly down coast in California or to the south, and it cruises along here until it ultimately ends up in a submarine canyon. So in this ideal situation, every littoral cell is distinct. So they typically start at a big headland and end at a submarine canyon. So here are all the littoral cell boundaries in California. There is some debate on sort of the exact starts and stops of them. That's an area of research we're currently working on. But we're going to focus down here on the Santa Barbara littoral cell. And this is the one I focused most of my research on, actually, because it is one of the most idealized cells that we have in California. It is also the longest cell. So it's about 144 miles long, and it encompasses the area all the way up to the Santa Maria River. We do get quite a bit of sand that doesn't actually make it around Point Conception, but about 30% of the material does. And then it comes down here, sand, again, you can imagine that zigzag motion. Doo, 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 doo. We have some sources of sand from all of these mountain streams, a source of sand from the Ventura River, and the largest source of sand in this cell is the Santa Clara River. So sand's cruising down the Santa Barbara littoral cell, and then it ultimately gets lost into the Magoo Submarine Canyon. Now, what's really cool from my scientific perspective is that we have these harbors here that punctuate the cell and catch the sediment. We dredge it out. We know how much we dredge, and we put it down coast so it can continue its natural journey, right? So measuring littoral drift, or the actual volume of sand moving with the waves, is really challenging. So we use these harbor dredging numbers as proxies for littoral drift and to help us understand the sediment budget. So just as a reminder, sand in our cell, about 70 to 90% of it comes from rivers and streams, with a much smaller amount coming from sea cliff erosion. Now, over the years, we've actually reduced the amount of sand coming into the Santa Barbara cell, to all the cells really. So we're changing that sediment budget. We're changing the sources of sand. And we do that when we dam our rivers. So again, remember 70 to 90% of our sand is coming from rivers and streams. So when the rivers are dammed, we're blocking that natural supply of sediment. Not all of it, but reducing the amount of sediment. For example, the Matilaha Dam is reducing the amount of sediment from the Ventura River by about 40%. We also armor our sea cliffs with, concrete seawalls or revetments, preventing sea cliff erosion. And that sea cliff erosion, while it's a much smaller amount, it's still part of the sand budget for the entire Santa Barbara littoral cell. We also channelize our streams, have debris basins, we have groins, we have jetties. All of those things are blocking the movement of sand. So with that reduction in sand supply, on top of that, we are adding sea level. So what can we really do to help our beach width, right? Under a natural, undeveloped coastline, beaches are built to be very dynamic. They can take the smacking of the waves, they can move inland with sea level, they can move out with sea level. They are really this dynamic, energetic zone. Now, when we draw a line with our infrastructure and say, this is where the beach needs to be, we present a problem for the beach, because that's not really the way a beach is naturally designed to be. It's naturally moving, right? So we have to figure out how to work with the current conditions. What is the sand budget? Where is the sand coming from? Where do we have our sources of sand being reduced? Where have we added seawalls where we're essentially hardening that line and not allowing the beach to shift? We have to figure out all of these things on this wider scope, this regional frame. And that's where that regional sand management comes into play. So we really need to make sure that when we're looking at making alterations to the coastline, whether that's with a seawall or an armoring structure, a groin, a jetty, beach nourishment, a dam and a river, anything that's going to be altering the supply of sediment or the movement of sediment, we really need to think about that on a larger scale, right? So how is that going to impact all the beaches that are depending on that sand down coast? Okay. So let's just look back at the Santa Barbara cell again. Here we have, anything that's happening up here in Santa Barbara is going to be affecting all, or Gaviota, and down here in Santa Barbara and Isla Vista is going to be affecting all of the beaches down coast, right? So again, we can look at the harbor dredging as a proxy for how much sand is moving along the coast in these different areas. So you can't read these, I know that, but just here's Santa Barbara Harbor, Ventura Harbor, Channel Islands Harbor, and Port Hueneme. So when we look at the dredging histories, the volumes of sand removed since the harbors were built, right, in the 30s for Santa Barbara and 60s for some of the other ones, if we average those out to eliminate the year-to-year variations, we start to see and understand how much sand is moving along our coastline under the influence of these waves. So you can see in Santa Barbara, we dredge about 300,000 cubic yards of sand annually. Again, this is an average annual dredge volume. We typically dredge it out of the harbor, put it down drift so it can continue its journey. We get a little bit of sand added from the Ventura River and some of the mountain streams, and it gets stuck there in Ventura Harbor. We dredge about 600,000 cubic yards annually from Ventura Harbor, and then we put it down drift, cruises down there till it gets caught in the sand trap at Channel Islands Harbor, which is what it was built to do.
That one?
We dredge that about every other year, but it averages out to 1 million cubic yards per year. And then we bypass Port Hueneme Harbor, and it continues its journey until it's ultimately lost into the Magoo Submarine Canyon. Okay. Hold on, my computer is freezing. Wait for it.
May I ask a question while we're freezing?
Yeah, sure.
So why is Port Hueneme so low relative to the other? Because my basic knowledge is that Port Hueneme needs to, the city of Port Hueneme, the bypass around the port of Hueneme needs to be at 1.2 million cubic yards of sand per year to mimic Mother Nature. So it just, I'm a little confused.
It does. So they take that out of Channel Islands Harbor and bypass Port Hueneme. So they actually, they put a little bit there in between the two harbors, but most of it goes on the other side of Port Hueneme. So Port Hueneme itself has the Hueneme Canyon that comes in there. So the Hueneme Canyon is a natural sink of sediment. So we typically bypass that and put it on the other side of the canyon so it can continue its journey. So hold on one second. I have to restart my PowerPoint.
Kiki, while you're, Mark, if you don't, I think Congresswoman Brownlee's on and just jumped in. So maybe while you're redoing that.
Oh yeah, great. Perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
Julia, are you available?
I am.
Perfect timing. That's right. Good.
Yeah.
Good to have you. Thank you.
Nice to be here, and I apologize for the delay. I'm on the Natural Resources Committee, and we were having a meeting where we had some recorded votes, and I had to stick around to make those, although we have more recorded votes, but the chairman delayed the meeting for a little bit so they could gather all of the committee members back to the committee hearing, so I won't have too much time, but it's really, really great to be with all of you. I thank you for the opportunity, and thank each and every one of you for your leadership around making sure our coastline is as healthy as it possibly can, particularly with sand replenishment. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And you know, we've all been in this fight together. You know, it's always been a challenge from the day I stepped into Congress. Every single year, it seems to be, you know, an uphill battle to make sure that we have the appropriate funding to do the dredging, particularly for Channel Islands Harbor and Ventura Harbor. And generally, every year we're successful.
My Zoom call went down.
Oops.
Phone line.
You could go ahead, Congresswoman.
Yeah, so generally every year we have been successful, some years more successful than others, but the Army Corps thankfully understands the great importance of the dredging and has generally accommodated us. But you know, finally, there's been some good news and some opportunities that have broken open. The first big action was actually with the CARES package and being able to, excuse me, decouple the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund from the appropriations process. That was a big deal. But we needed the second step, which was we needed to pass the WRDA Act, the Water Resources Development Act, to ensure that those funds were there. And the WRDA Act then said, you know, we could spend all of the contributions from the 2 previous years and then start taking money from the balance of that Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, which is roughly in the neighborhood of about $9 million. We could start extracting some of those monies. So I think for the future, maybe you know, the battles won't be so uphill, and we've loosened up some resources, you know, to move forward on that. So I think that's, you know, certainly good news to report. You know, I think that's in essence what I need to say to you guys. But again, you know, I thank you all for your important leadership around this. And without your advocacy and so forth, we would not have been successful. So your advocacy obviously is extremely, extremely critical. And I will keep my fingers crossed that we'll be, excuse me, to be able to create some more opportunities as we move forward this year. We're obviously right now working on the COVID relief package through reconciliation. After we complete that package, the next big priority will be a major infrastructure bill to get people back to work and to stimulate the economy and try to get us back to some sense of normalcy across the country. And maybe within that infrastructure bill, there might be some other opportunities. So I sit on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, so I will be intimately involved in the process. So with that, I just say a big thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for joining us this morning in your busy schedule.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know Sharon's been with you and will stick with you. I wish I could listen to the whole report, because what I did here was quite interesting. And, you know, I guess the good news around the Port of Hueneme is that we don't have to dredge that as often as we do the harbors. I don't know, Sharon, it's been like 10 years or so since the harbor has been dredged. So it sort of has its natural elements that doesn't require the same kind of dredging that the 2 harbors do. So all good.
Again, thank you very, very much for joining.
Thank
us.
you, and I apologize for having to leave, but I wish we didn't have to meet under these circumstances. I like the old way of you guys coming to DC and meeting in my office, but given the circumstances, it has to be this way. But thanks again, and all the best to everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Yeah.
So Kiki, you should be able to
Yeah.
restart your.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. This has been a fun adventure. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. And everybody can hear me. So here's where we were. We were at the dredging. So again, we dredge Santa Barbara Harbor, move it down coast. It gets caught in Ventura Harbor with some added sediment. We move that down coast. We have some more sediment supplied. It gets trapped in Channel Islands, Sand Trap and Harbor. We bypass Port Hueneme, so we don't have to dredge that one very much, and send it on down. So you all are well aware, and you have the same picture. I love it. Well aware of what happens when we're not able to dredge Channel Islands Harbor as much as we need to, because that is the only source of sand for the beaches down coast. So again, just as another perspective, here are all of the watersheds. Each littoral cell, if you remember from when I was earlier talking, it's like in an idealized situation, these cells start at a headland and end at a canyon, and they're not at all leaky. They're perfect. Well, this is nature, and that is not how it happens. So if we look at the Santa Barbara cell right here, we have the sand cruising on down here. Some of it gets lost into Hueneme Canyon, which is actually why the port is there, because Hueneme Canyon comes in, it offers this nice deeper water for the port. But we bypass that, move the sand around to the other side where sand is lost into the Magoo Submarine Canyon. And then again, this cell is not tight, so we get some sand leaking around there, and about 10% of that sand. So if you think about 1 million cubic yards per year of sand, about 100,000 cubic yards makes its way, or historically has made its way, into the Zuma cell, where it's ultimately lost into Doom Canyon. And then you can see the other cells, how they work here. So let's just focus in here on the Zuma cell. And I bring this up because it's really important to keep that regional perspective. I know we talk a lot about the Santa Barbara cell, right? So again, you see here that sand cruising down. Here's Hueneme Submarine Canyon. Here's Magoo Submarine Canyon. So you have that sand coming in here. We dredge it, bypass it. It comes down here. We dredge it again, bypass it. Some of it's lost into Hueneme Canyon. The rest of it comes down here, and a portion of it travels down here. So if you all, I'm sure, are aware of the issues we've had at Broad Beach and down here as we get into Los Angeles County, the sand cruises down here until it's ultimately lost into Doom Submarine Canyon. So what's happened down here, this is a zoom in of that Magoo Submarine Canyon. So what's happened is this canyon has actually gotten a little bit closer to the shore. So now it's capturing more of the sand than it historically has. And that has caused really big consequences for places like Broad Beach. So here's Point Doom. And again, that's a big barrier of sand. And we have Doom Submarine Canyon down here, which is catching all of that sand this way. And so here again is another aerial. We have sand coming down here till it gets caught up at Point Doom and funneled off into the Doom Submarine Canyon. Now remember, where is this cell getting its sand? Right? A big source of this sand has historically been the sand that's kind of leaking out of the Santa Barbara cell. So if we put that in perspective, what we're doing in the Santa Barbara cell is actually affecting this whole stretch of coastline. So this is where that regional perspective comes into play. And again, if we look at the consequences of interrupting this sort of natural movement of sand, or having natural processes like the head incision of the canyons where it's capturing more sand, essentially we're changing the sand budget. So it's really important to understand how that's going to affect the beaches. Here's Lechuza Point, and you can see it was a wide sandy beach. Now they don't have any sand. And yes, there's sea level rise and bigger storms and there's seasonal fluctuation, but the bigger piece of that puzzle is the sand budget has changed. Here's Broad Beach in 1972. It actually got its name because it was literally a broad beach. There was a large supply of sand there. Now it's not, right? Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that we've hardened the coastline. We've drawn a line in the sand and said the beach has to be here and the homes are here. But another bigger piece of that is that we've changed the sand budget and that Magoo Canyon is capturing more of the sand. So what are the key takeaways? Again, I could talk about this for days, but for today, your key takeaways are that sand is moving along the coast under the influence of waves, and this is called littoral drift. So you really need to understand that regional sediment budget to figure out why your beaches are responding the way that they are. So if your sources are greater than your sinks of sand, you're going to get widening of the beach. So if you were to do a beach nourishment project, you are adding a source of sand, so your beach will grow. Now keep in mind that that sand that you just added is going to continue its pathway down the cell. So if you were to do a beach nourishment project, say up in Goleta, that sand is going to move as part of the system all the way down the cell. And so we actually see these signatures. So you can see when we dredge, it actually has like a big slug of sand and you can watch that slug of sand move down the coast. Similarly, if we don't dredge and we have a lot of erosion, that reduction in the sand supply will actually travel down the coast and we sort of see those signatures and it moves about a mile every year. It's pretty interesting. So it's really important to keep this regional perspective. And then just, again, any alteration you make to the sand budget, whether that's, adding a groin to retain sand, it's going to have consequences down drift. And in the Santa Barbara cell, it can have consequences 100 miles down coast, right? So you really have to understand what you're doing in different parts of these cells. Also, it's important to realize that we're losing about 1 million cubic yards of sand down the Magoo submarine canyon. And so when we're coming into a world where sand is a hot commodity and we're trying to find sand that can naturally be replenished to our beaches, one place we should look is sand that's, meeting its doom down a submarine canyon, right? How can we use that sand before it's lost forever at the bottom of the ocean? Does that make sense? That's it. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Kiki, thank you very, very much for the presentation.
Yes.
Because we're right on schedule, which ironically, but we're not held to schedule. I did, as a matter of the security function, now allow for screen sharing. So we're not going to try to move this host function along because the controls are really not working. Therefore, we have some time at the end for questions. So maybe we just hold the questions. Well, Christina, did you have a question you wanted to raise? Go ahead.
I did. Kiki, wonderful presentation. As my background of engineering, this was, I could kind of geek out a little bit, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, my husband's an engineer. He does that too. He's like, so how's it moving?
So really wonderful. I had a question about the health of the submarine canyons as well. If you do bypass some of those submarine canyons, I understand that the submarine canyons are considered almost alive and they have to be fed by the sand. Otherwise, the canyons could potentially grow towards the shore and cause some issues. So is there a balance of how much you can bypass the canyons and keep the canyons healthy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something it's so funny because everything just ties together in such an interesting way. We were just talking about this with another person who studies submarine canyons because we don't know yet. The honest answer is we don't know what reducing that amount of sediment will do because it's those turbidity currents and, if it has sand to move down, it'll just keep moving that sand down. But if you take that supply of sand away, what's going to happen? So with a place like Magoo Canyon, it had that sort of headward movement, right? So even though it was only 10% of the sand that was getting by there, 10% of a million cubic yards of sand, still 100,000 cubic yards of sand. And that's the exact amount they see as a deficit down in Broad Beach, right? So yeah, it's going to have consequences down drift of that. So we need to explore those pieces. It's a great question.
Kiki, if I may follow up on that. So the quick solution of, oh, well, let's just build a sand trap right in front of the Magoo Harbor, and then we'll be able to save Magoo from additional rock revetments because we'll bypass the sand. So
Yep.
it's back to that, for every man-made action, there's a reaction.
Yep.
And but at the same time, over the last 20 years, Magoo has shown the most impact from a lack of sand. And then my other question is, what about the catch basins and the fact that every mountain along the beach every mountain wants to become a beach. And when these catch basins fill up, we truck the sediment to Lompoc. One of the things Beacon has educated me on is like, we got to try to find a way to get that sediment across the street into the ocean, because ultimately that's where it would have ended up. And then one final question and kind of comment, like the Montecito mudslide that closed the 101 freeway, all that material would have been destined for the beach, and then we trucked it out to Lompoc. So a lot of this is we're kind of doing it to ourselves, I think, in some respects.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's why it's really important to understand where the sand is coming from. It's similar to areas in Pierpont where they, remove the big dunes in front of their houses and like put the sand in a landfill. You're like, no, that's for the beach all the way down. So I think it's really important that we look critically at the sources of sand and sort of what we're doing with that, whether it's caught in the debris basin or whether it's from the landslide. This is natural material that would end up on the beach. Now, naturally, it would end up on the beach after its incredible journey down the rivers, where it's sorted and not contaminated and has this sort of natural trajectory. And so when it's, material that's taken out people's houses and landed on the highway, it's a little bit different, but there still needs to be some thought into how to return that material to the beach, because it's essentially, nourishing all of the beaches all the way down through Broad Beach, really, right? And so it's important to keep that regional perspective in mind when we alter the sediment budget.
One more quick question with regards to Santa Clara River. Those of us who live here, we know that that river rarely busts open. Like, we have a rain cycle every 4 or 5 years where, from shore to shore, the river is just empty and all that debris. So how dramatic of a change does that do to the littoral process when, say, we have a El Nino type rain season and the river's just flowing for a month or two?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So the sources of sand, we report them as like this amount of sand every year. But in reality, these huge flood events that dump tons of sediment into the system, that sand can be stored in offshore bars that'll feed the beaches for the next 10 years. So there's this really critical balance between, you can only move the sand that the waves have the energy to move. So if you have more sand there, the waves will still move the same amount of sand. When you have less sand there, the waves will still move that same amount of sand. And so when you have these big breakthroughs, you're adding the sand that's probably feeding the beaches for a decade. And so these cycles of El Nino, times when we have a lot of El Ninos or fewer El Ninos, they all kind of average out overall, but it gets tricky to manage on a year-to-year basis. So what we're seeing now is probably effects of the drought that have now not supplied enough sand for however many years. And so we're starting to see a reduction in our sand supply, and we're using up these stored pockets of sand that we've had. Does that make sense?
Yes, very interesting. It's dynamic and
It is
the
really
expert.
fascinating.
So Kiki, I hope you'll be able to stay with us until we have the presentations from the harbors, and then we'll probably have some more discussion.
I'm so interested because I've been staring at the harbor dredging numbers for many years, and so it's fun to be here.
Great. So as I said, we're going to now have presentations from local port districts and harbors that kind of give a flavor to what Kiki gave us an overview for. And Todd, you're the next one up on the schedule. We have Todd Mitchell representing Ventura Harbor, and you can share your screen, Todd, and we don't have to change the host function, and we can move right into your presentation. Again, thank you for coming to present today to us all.
Yeah, there
You're
we go.
muted, though.
My mute button disappeared when I shared my screen, but now I found it. So yeah, well, I
There you
have
go.
to say again, just as Kiki was set up very well, I think her presentation, oops, that's the wrong one, right?
You're coming in very faint.
Is this better?
Yep.
There we go. So yeah, here, let me see if I can. Okay, so yeah, so as I was saying, Kiki really set me up very well for my presentation here. You can see my presentation, the title.
Yep.
Perfect. So yeah, so I'm just gonna, if I can advance my slides here. There we go. Whoop. So yeah, just going to cover a couple of things that are going to be, I think, interesting. Is I'm going to focus on two different parts of the dredging, because we have two different components that are very critical and very different. One is the federal dredging program, which is run by the Army Corps of Engineers and is in progress at this very moment. Then the inner harbor dredging, which is completely different because the material type is completely different. And then I'm going to talk about how the beaches at Ventura Harbor have been impacted over each winter, what the dredge material placement looks like, the beach nourishment, and then a quick summary. Everybody knows where Ventura Harbor is, I'm sure, on this call. The entrance channel is designed to be maintained at least minus 20 mean low water. And we actually maintain the inner harbor to at least minus 17 feet to allow our purse seiner, which are the squid fishing vessels, to come in fully loaded, which will draw up to 16 feet when they have in the vicinity of 200 tons of squid on board. So we have the need to maintain a very deep harbor for what some would call a recreational harbor, because we really see ourselves as a working waterfront, even though we're not moving cargo containers and bananas like our friends to the south. So just a quick history. In the 50s, the state of California was building the coast highway through Ventura, and it was agreed that the state would excavate the harbor, and that was going to contribute the construction material for the highway. And the city was responsible for the harbor design and maintenance. And then in '68, Congress directed the Corps of Engineers to take over responsibility for the navigation channel. In '69, the Santa Clara River effectively destroyed the harbor, and the Corps of Engineers repaired the damages and repaired the levee between the Santa Clara River Delta and the harbor. And in '71, the offshore breakwater was constructed. And then I think it was in 2007, the breakwater was modified even further to better protect the entrance to the harbor. And currently, like I said, the Corps of Engineers maintains a federal channel. They do annual maintenance dredging, typically in January and February, and that is ongoing at this very moment. Because Ventura Harbor is not a home to a U.S. Coast Guard station, it is imperative that we proactively work with the federal elected officials. Congresswoman Brownlee in particular has been super, super helpful. So Sharon, please again share our ongoing thanks. And that's because the way the Corps of Engineers prioritizes, racks and stacks, as it were, navigation features in the harbor or in the nation, Coast Guard stations are #1 and #2 out of 5. So the best we can score is #3. So we have to really work hard to make sure that we make it to the list in the president's budget and or in the Army Corps' work plan, which is basically the extra money that the Corps of Engineers has allocated beyond what the president has provided in their budget. So in typical fashion, we get partially funded in the president's budget and then partially funded in the work plan each year, which means we're scrambling twice each year to make sure that we have enough money, or the Corps has enough money in place to complete the dredging. Because in 2014, and well, actually long before that, but it was important in 2014, the Port District maintains all of the same permits required to do the outer harbor dredging, meaning if the Corps cannot get the funding they need, we can self-perform all of the dredging. We have all the permits in place at all times. We spend a lot of money, probably $200,000 a year just on maintaining the permits each year and the monitoring costs. But the reason we can't do the dredging is because it's about $5.8 million per year to execute, and our annual revenue is only 9 million. So you can imagine that one event, maybe we could tolerate. A second event and we'd be bankrupt. So we absolutely need to continue to work with our federal elected officials to keep that funding coming. So aerial view here, show you some of the stuff. The sand trap, we have one too. It's to the north of the harbor. North is to your top right here. It's angled because of some of the other images that I'll be showing. The federal entrance is coming into the harbor from the south and turning inward to the right. Surface Knoll Beach, I'll be showing you later. And then the Arundel Barranca is a canal that, as you can see, runs through farmland and collects a lot of silt and fine-grained sediment, which creates a lot of headaches and heartburn for the city of Ventura and as well as the Port District. And if you can see my cursor, can you? So that is the dividing line between the city of Ventura and the Port District. So the city of Ventura, the Ventura Keys back here, they need to maintain access, and we need to help maintain access so that the boaters and the homeowners back here can get out to the open ocean. That's an obligation on both agencies. Zooming in a little, the sand trap, the federal channel entrance. Manson, as of when I left work yesterday, was still in the entrance channel. At the first opportunity, when the waves and the surge is low enough, they'll be moving north to the sand trap. Typically, slightly coarser grain material is captured in the sand trap, which is really optimal for beach nourishment because it's the most resilient sand that ends up in the harbor. This is the same thing. This is actually what's called a bathymetry map. It is a map showing the depths or soundings in the entrance channel and the sand trap. In this case, the dark purple and pinkish purple are good. They're near the authorized depth. Everything else is shallow or shallower, and so we actually have a lot of sand in the harbor right now. Prior to Christmas, the survey showed we had about 270,000 cubic yards to move, and in 1 month that more than doubled from 270 to 630,000 cubic yards available to be moved. So for us, the winter storm season, basically, even though there was no one rain event, the winter storm season between Christmas and the end of January contributed more sand than all of the period between February and December of the year before. Now, the inner harbor is an entirely different thing. Because we're not on an estuary, the inner harbor of Ventura, most of it doesn't need any maintenance dredging on any regular basis at all. However, the Arundel Barranca that I showed you feeds a lot of sediment, very fine-grained, muddy sediments off of the farmland, and that is a major contributor to the material that must be removed periodically, usually every 2 to 5 years. And it's about 6% of the federal program that we need to move out. But because the sediment is very, very fine grained, it is not suitable for beach placement, according to EPA Section 404. So this Arundel Barranca here it basically spits out a lot of fine grained sand and creates a bottleneck right here. So every few years we need to get in and remove that material. And this is the bathymetry survey. Again, these are the soundings in feet. The big number is the whole number, and then the little number behind it's like the decimal point. And that's how deep the water is in these different areas. Ideally, inside this blue box, we would set that up to -18 because it's a little mini sand trap for the sediment that comes out of the Barranca. And then here in this channel, we try to maintain 15 feet to get all the way back into the Keys. So beach erosion, well, everyone's aware of this. Our erosion looks a little different than in Wainimi. But it certainly exists. What we end up having is a lot of small cliffs that form on the beaches and extend right to the toe of the beach, or toe of the berms or the dunes. So this is Surfers Knoll Beach, very popular for surfing. And you can see that this photo is taken by a harbor master. He has a drone license and a drone, and it's been an extremely valuable asset for us to be able to capture this information. This was taken February 10th. You can actually see the dredge, the H.R. Morris, in the background inside the entrance channel working away. But you can see the erosion of the beach here extends right to the toe of the dunes and actually is eroding the dunes themselves. Here again, another angle, and you can see that's quite a cliff. There's a person doing some searching for watches and coins, but you can see that that cliff is almost as tall as he is. And over here near the dune, it's even taller. So the material placement obviously becomes very, very important. The navigation channel and sand trap consists about 70% of coarse grain sand, which is suitable for beach nourishment. On average, over the past 20 years, 550,000 cubic yards has been moved from the channel and the sand trap and put on the beach. This year, we'll probably do about the same, maybe 580. The federal dredge material is placed between the Surfers Knoll Beach southward to the McGrath State Park property line. Currently, the state park does not allow us to place material in the state park area. So from the perspective of infrastructure, as you can see, we're not very far. Those dunes, if we lost the dunes, Spinnaker Drive, which accesses all of the northwest side of the harbor, could be imperiled. The parking lot and restrooms, there's not even any dunes here, so the erosion here could be very, very rapid and wipe out the infrastructure for the parking lot and the restrooms. And then, of course, the dunes and the habitat for snowy plover and western least terns would also be jeopardized. So it's very, very important that we continue to maintain those beaches. So again, as I said, 70% of the material in the inner harbor is fine grain. So this can't go on the beach. So even though it's only 6%, it is not suitable to be placed on the beach and has to be placed below the high tide line effectively at the mouth of the Santa Clara River when the river mouth is open and the river is flowing. So Mayor Gama was discussing this. The Santa Clara River deposits about 3 million cubic yards of fine grain sediment a year. So it's consistent for us to place fine grain sediments in front of the river mouth, but we can only do that when the river is flowing. And this photo, again taken by Harbor Master, shows the Santa Clara River mouth is very, very much closed. I believe this was early February, this photo as well. And you can see some of the wetlands back here. That's also built up by those fine grains. For reference, here's the Surfers Knoll parking lot again. One thing that also is a big concern is the City of Ventura's water treatment plant, just off the screen to the left, will not, at some point in the future, will no longer be contributing water into the Santa Clara River, which means that it's very, very likely the Santa Clara River mouth will stop being open ever again. There'll be an offshore pipeline constructed that will transport the water from the treatment plant offshore about 1 mile. So that's going to be a major heartache and hassle, and will certainly impact the sediment budget, as Kiki was discussing. 3 million cubic yards of fine grain sediment gone could be a devastating loss to the beaches to the south. So beach nourishment. Well, I mean, Ventura Harbor beaches provide recreational use almost all season. To the surface, it really is all season. Maintenance of the Surfers Knoll Beach is essential to protect the infrastructure I showed you. Placement adjacent to the Ventura Harbor is consistent with the federal standard, meaning it is the lowest cost alternative. For us to move sand anywhere else, the requirement of the federal government is that the local partner, local stakeholder, must make up the difference in cost. So we are very grateful that it coincides that the best placement area happens to also re-nourish our beaches. But I think it's important to take a look at this. When we talk about 500, in this case, this is from 2019, it was the closest that I had an example of, 500,000 cubic yards of material only restored 1,500 linear feet of beach. So that, even though that is a pretty good amount of material, 1/4 of what was placed on Wainimi Beach this year, it's still, for us, that's only 1,500 feet of beach. We didn't even make it to the state park line that year, and we probably won't this year either. It's not a lot of sand. 500,000 cubic yards doesn't go a long way. I thought it's really important to see that visually as to how much that really restores. I think it was 250 feet of additional beach. So from the dune outward was 250 feet, but at only 1,500 feet, north to south of beach was restored. But still, that's quite a big improvement for the local area. So this is actually last year's, again, photos from our Harbor Masters drone. You can see on the left the condition in the fall of fall of 2019, and then after nourishment in February of 2020. So you can see
And
that.
Todd,
Yep.
This is Mark. So I'm going to ask you to finish up your presentation.
Yep. The next slide's the summary. So yeah. So anyways, I just wanted to summarize that. Yeah, that 550,000 cubic yards really doesn't go very far. It only filled up 1,500 feet of beach. And then periodically, the city and the port district have to work to get a small portion of inner harbor material onto out of the harbor and in front of the Santa Clara River mouth. And that is my presentation. Dredging is underway.
Thank you very much. And I'll ask people to hold their questions till the end so we can get through the other presentations. And now we're going to move to the Channel Islands Harbor to Susie Watkins, who's the Deputy Harbor Director, to give us a status report. And screen sharing is enabled. Therefore, Susie, take it away.
Okay, got myself unmuted. I'm sharing my screen. All I need to do now.
And we see you.
Let's see. There we go. Is that working?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. So our colleagues, as we've noted, have done a great job of covering the basics of sand movement and a lot of what we do. Channel Islands Harbor project is a little different from Ventura Harbor. Actually, every project is different. But I'll move through this fairly quickly just to cover the basics so we can get through to discussing the issues that need to be addressed and future planning that we can all work on cooperatively. So as we've discussed, Channel Islands Harbor is right here where it's labeled a Coast Guard station. In this image is where Channel Islands Harbor is. And you can see a close-up of Wainimi Canyon. It is very deep and right down coast. So the port of Wainimi was constructed in 1939. And as soon as the first jetty was finished, the sand diversion started impacting down coast. They saw erosion even before construction was completed on the port. Of course, when the Navy seized the port, that became federal property, which is why we have federal engagement and a congressional authorization on this project, both because it's federal property and it's damaging both of the Navy bases down coast. So there was sand replenishment down coast intermittently between 1940 and 1960, but since 1960, the Army Corps of Engineers has dredged the harbor every other year. So this is a biennial project. The primary purpose of the project is to trap and bypass that sand, mimicking the normal down coast flow that was lost with the creation of those jetties. The county took the opportunity. The sand trap, once it is constructed, creates a natural protected entrance. So the harbor was constructed behind the sand trap, but our purpose for existing and the reason we are where we are is for this sand bypass project and to facilitate it. So it's important to remember when we are advocating for this project, it is for down coast protection. If the sand trap is not maintained, it of course will impact our harbor entrance. But as long as the sand trap is maintained, the entrance remains clear and we do very minimal internal dredging. This again is some illustrations of exactly how the project works. We do have our sand trap out there. There's a detached breakwater that helps that sand settle in just north of our entrance jetties. And then when the dredge comes in every other year, it bypasses that canyon and pushes it down coast onto Wainimi Beach. And this is an aerial looking out towards the island. You see Channel Islands Harbor, Port of Wainimi, Anacapa Island out there. And you can see, again, you see the sand moving down coast and settling very nicely into that sand trap. You can tell this is before a dredge cycle because we got a pretty good amount in the sand trap and very, very little at the northern end of Wainimi Beach here. And that's just another very nice illustration that the Army Corps provided. That is the H.R. Morris. It is 220 feet long. It is a big piece of equipment and it moves a lot of sand, up to 50,000 cubic yards a day. So our constraints on this project are the sand available to be removed. So this goes to that sand supply that we're talking about. The environmental window for the work, we are constrained by grunion, nesting, snowy plover, other environmental issues. So our dredging window in this area, and this is for Channel Islands, Ventura, all the way down Oceanside, is September 15th to March 15th. So within that work window, the Channel Islands Harbor takes about 3 months, but they also have to pick up the work in Ventura Harbor. This year they started up in Oceanside for a couple of weeks before they arrived for our project. So they're typically here from October or November into January, February, if conditions are going well. The other significant constraint we have is air quality permits. Again, this is a big piece of equipment. It has 4 diesel engines, and it holds one of the largest air quality permits in the county. And of course, to make all of this work, we do need federal funding. And the contract is awarded by the Corps of Engineers. There is a Navy match that was allocated in the congressional authorization. So this year they actually just wrapped up, as Todd noted, they just moved into Ventura Harbor. So from October to end of January, this cycle we moved 1.9 million cubic yards of sand. Which is quite a bit of sand. If you're doing the math, that is about 95,000 dump trucks of sand. So try and imagine that moving down the beach. It unfortunately was still short of our full authorization of 2.5 million cubic yards because with the Corps funding from Congress, the work plan allocation we received, along with the Navy match, we had about $16 million to execute this project. To get our full dredging amount, we needed about $20 million under the contract. The air permits, as I said, the two biggest challenges we have right now are the air permits. As I said, this is a big permit. The contractor had permits to cover 1.6 to 1.8 million cubic yards. They actually purchased additional fuel credits to complete their work and on a go-forward basis. But the cost of those increased credits will likely be included in our future project costs because right now they're under a contract that actually includes the next dredge cycle. They do 3 cycles at a time in the bid. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some price increases related to those permits in addition to your normal cost increases over a 6-year period. And it's important to note this project, even though it's a big permit, it only receives half the benefit of those air quality permits because it's only used every other year and they are not permitted to roll forward those air quality credits. So they're actually paying, you could say, twice as much as needs to be to accomplish the work. The funding is always a challenge. There are significant competing priorities and needs, both within the core portfolio of work, as well as, of course, nationally in the federal budget. We have great partnership with our representation on Capitol Hill, particularly Julia Brownlee's office They are instrumental every year in helping us get funding for our local projects. And we also have very, very good working relationships with the Army Corps of Engineers on getting funding allocated to our project. And we appreciate the Corps executing this project every 2 years with whatever funding they're given. The ways that we, Channel Islands and the other waterfront facilities work on the funding piece is we at California Marine Affairs and Navigation Conference. This is our statewide representation to Washington, D.C. We go there twice a year and advocate and educate for the Corps of Engineer projects up and down the coast. We meet with the executive office to work on the president's budget, as well as with our partners to get congressional appropriations and all the way down through the various Corps of Engineer offices. And that's all I had to say about our project. I look forward to the conversation and discussion about what we can do to improve our use of our resources on a regional basis.
Thank you, Susie. So we have 2 more presentations before we get to discussion. So I want to welcome Christina Birdsley from the Port of Hueneme. And Christina, screen sharing is enabled, so you should be able to share your screen as you present this morning. Thank you again for being willing to come and present today.
Okay, are you able to see the screen at this time?
Yes, we are, and we can hear you as well.
From current slide. Super. So thank you. I'll run through just some intro slides for anybody on the call who's not familiar with the port. So we are governed by an elected board of commissioners. Jason Hodge is our current president. He's also a local fireman. Mary Ann Rooney is our vice president this year, and she's a local businesswoman. Both Jess Herrera and Jess Ramirez were longshoremen. Jess Ramirez is recently retired, and Jess Herrera is continuing a longshoreman. And our newest member, Selena Zacharias, is our newest member to the board. She is also a senior director of community and government relations at CSUCI. And you can kind of see our port governance includes the city of Oxnard and Hueneme and the beach communities. For the vision and mission, it's important to understand that we do not collect taxes, so we have to operate like a business. And the revenues from our customers and operating the port go back into infrastructure improvements, but also benefit the community. From the mission of the port is to be able to move specialized cargo, but provide the maximum possible economic and social benefits to our community and industries served. Of course, we can't talk about this year without discussing COVID and how we were actually able to outperform what we anticipated. 100% of our OEMs from the auto sector had closed down at one point. So 100% of them had closed down manufacturing autos. So we really ended up buckling our seatbelts and changed our budgets and made sure that we were ready for the ride. However, our customers were able to diversify, and when the auto manufacturers were open, we had a large surge. So we were actually able to finish out this last year just short of the 2019 fiscal year, which was a record-breaking year. So that shows our revenue dip was just 1%. We were anticipating what we had budgeted for was closer to 30%. Fruit cargo went up a little bit. I won't go into the details of why we saw each of these, but it is nice to see that the revenue and that we were able to continue having people work and move cargo and critical cargo to our community. What does that mean? We were able to keep people employed. So from 2013 through 2018, it shows the increase in jobs, over 15,000 local and induced jobs, and the economic activity into our area over $1.7 billion. This kind of has a breakdown of the jobs in our local area. Oxnard close to 1,000 and Hueneme a little over 400. So even though we were able to, in the last several years, increase the cargo movement through the port, at the same time we were able to decrease the emissions through the port. So this is a success story, being able to share what we're doing for the community and what we do, that we have a green mission related to that. So we have several projects here, air monitors that we're really proud of being able to have those available and the data available for the community. Those are actually located on Haycox Elementary. We're moving to zero emission by putting in the infrastructure so that we can plug in green EUTRs. Those are the tractor trucks that move the cargo. We have a grant that is helping move a fuel cell truck from the LA area to Hueneme. We're putting in infrastructure so that the cranes can actually plug in and not use their diesel engines. We also have vessels that come in and are able to plug in. One of these projects as well, of course, is going deep. So our port was originally at 35 feet and we're going down to 45 feet in the sand that renourishes those beaches. So it kind of gives a showcase of the 3 projects, 4 including Ventura Harbor as well, but it's nice when we're talking about these projects to really understand the difference of each of these projects. And I think the setup getting to this presentation really helps. You can see here the Channel Island Sand Trap, and then we have a project for deepening our berths, and we were actually awarded a Tiger grant to be able to do that. So from the port district is, if you can see my cursor, is we have to actually do the deepening that's just along the face of our wharf out to about 60 to 80 feet. Outside of that is then the Army Corps of Engineers job to do the rest. We do a cost share in that. However, those are 2 separate projects. So I'll go into the project of doing this deepening. The feasibility study actually started in 1999. And then in 2009, we went to move forward with the deepening project and found some unsuitable material. And so we had to determine how to take that unsuitable material and take care of it and get the harbor clean enough and suitable enough to be able to do the deepening project. So in 2009, let me see if I can get this to play for you. We were able to do a confined aquatic disposal program. This is just a nice way to be able to show what we did. Let me know if it's showing. There we go. So we actually did a confined aquatic disposal, cut out a section in the turning basin 80 feet deep, found the sections in the harbor that had unsuitable material and put it into that CAD, and then took clean material and put it on top and capped it, and then put some revetment stone on top. And then we had a program throughout that period of time and continuing to make sure that it's testing and that we're able to check and see that that confined aquatic disposal system has worked and has actually been a program and a model for other ports around the nation. Now that the harbor is suitable, let me move forward if it's allowing me. Doesn't want to go to the next one. There we go. Now that the harbor is suitable to be able to go into the deepening program, you can see the reason for the deepening, not only for the beach nourishment, which of course is very important. We also have some vessels that come into port and have to wait for tides. So being able to have that extra 5 feet we won't have to have them go out to anchor and wait for those safety precautions to have a certain clearance under keel to be able to move in. And then some of our existing ships could potentially load heavier and still have the same number of calls, but move more cargo, which of course is important for our local jobs and our local economy. So let's look at the history of what has moved out of the Port of Hueneme for beach nourishment. So you can see from 1999, a maintenance dredge, and like we talked, the maintenance dredging isn't necessarily required as often in the Port of Hueneme because, as you saw in the other presentations, we don't get the accumulation of sediment in Hueneme in the harbor itself because of the Deepwater Canyon and because of some of the bypassing from the Channel Islands dredge. So in 2004, again, we had another maintenance dredge. Then you can see in 2009 that the CAD disposal. And then in 2020, we did our berth deepening. For the 5 berths we had enough funding with a grant and our existing funding to be able to do 2 of the 5 berths. So we are continuing looking for grants to continue that deepening process. And then we have the channel deepening from the Army Corps of Engineers that is ongoing. You can see those 2 projects broken up here, 20,000 cubic yards from our Tiger Grant project, and then the Army Corps of Engineers project that is ongoing. And the total project cost for the deepening of the 2 berths was $15.3 million. And we had our cost share here, that was Manson Construction as well. That project is now complete. And the Army Corps of Engineers deepening project, which is the entrance channel and the turning basin and slip, has the 370,000 cubic yards. That project cost is 10.5, and we have a cost share of 3.6. That contractor is Curtin Maritime, and we've been very pleased with that contractor. That project will be completed by March. This shows a little bit of where the sand is actually going. So we saw that our project along the berth side, Army Corps of Engineers is doing the entrance channel and turning basin. And this is where that sediment is going. Onshore here, and we'll see a picture of that onshore placement, and then also near shore. And we have seen, and can refer to the professionals here for that littoral drift, but the near shore is actually mutually beneficial as onshore in feeding this coastline. So here's a picture of before and after from the Channel Islands dredge. We too had a drone go up from the Fathom Works lab to take some pictures of before and after. So you can see the cuts, and that we had no beach left October 27th. And just a month later with the Channel Islands placement, that we now have this new beach that you can see here from the entrance of the port. I think that's it. Happy to answer questions when we're ready. Stop sharing. Okay. Mark, I think you're on mute.
So we have one final presentation. Thank you, Christina. And we have a representative of the Navy, Steve Granade, environmental engineer. Apologies for pronouncing your name, but screen sharing is enabled, Steve, so go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for allowing the Navy to make our presentation after many other ones. I'm going to try to be short. Really just going to add in a little bit of Navy activities. So I won't, although I will touch base on some of the dredging at Channel Islands Harbor. So we've seen a lot about the littoral cell. In our case, we're mainly interested in the section from Port Hueneme down to Point Magoo. We've heard quite a few people talk about the 2.5 million budget, which would be every 2 years or $1.25 million per year. That is 81% funded by the Army Corps of Engineers, 19% by the Navy. The Navy's interest is primarily in protecting key infrastructure down at Point Mugu, where beach erosion over the last 70 years has sort of forced the construction of about 1.5 miles of shoreline armoring structures, with more, being added every few years. We've looked at the dredging records, and we think that the current cumulative sand deficit between Port Hueneme and Point Mugu after the last dredging evolution is now at about 32 million cubic yards. Looking at the last few years, there has been plenty of material available in the sand trap, but unfortunately, not enough funding. Looking back from 2012 to 2020, you can see there was about an average of almost 3.2 million cubic yards in the sand trap, and yet we've only been able to bypass a little bit less than half of that. My numbers are a little bit different than some presented today. I think we heard.
Steve, this is Mark. This is Mark. You should share your screen. See if you can share your screen.
I thought I was sharing the screen.
I don't think we're seeing it. Others can tell me if we're seeing the screen or not. No, we're not. So go ahead and share the screen. There you go.
Does that show now?
Yep. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
So go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Like I said, so funding deficits, we've only been dredging about a little bit less than 50% of the available sand. The numbers that I show here are maybe a little bit different. I'm showing just 1.75 million onto the beach at Port Hueneme this year. There was some sand that was placed onto Silver Strand Beach, which makes up for the difference in the numbers. So as I said, the Navy thinks the current deficit is at about 32 million cubic yards. And the net effect of beaches at Point Mugu is that they're about 400 feet narrower than they were in about 1950. And interestingly enough, the Navy had additional funding this year, an extra $5 million, which would have allowed for the dredging of a full 2.5 million cubic yards. Unfortunately, what we found out when we attempted to transfer the funds to the Army Corps of Engineers was that there were administrative issues in addition to the air permit component that we heard previously, that prevents dredging more than 2 million cubic yards per cycle. Is that unfortunately the environmental planning documents, permits, and consultations have been prepared based on budget rather than actual requirement. So they actually place a hard limit of 2 million cubic yards per cycle, regardless of the availability of funding. So what the Navy is doing is that we are continuing to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to increase future funding to achieve the full bypass requirement, which for the Navy, that means not just 2.5 million, but as we've seen, all the sand that's available in the sand trap, which is typically has been closer to 3.2 million cubic yards. We've started to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to update all of the planning documents, consultations, and permits to increase the allowable biennial project volumes. And we hope to have that completed by the next cycle. Separately, down at Point Mugu, we have noticed that we have windblown sand that has sort of exited the littoral cell and builds up where it's inconvenient to some of our operations over roadways and other infrastructure. We're working to obtain a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to relocate that aeolian sand into the littoral zone, mostly at Point Mugu, but possibly over at Port Hueneme as well. And then we've started the process looking into locating a offshore sand borrow location outside of the littoral zone that we could use to for direct beach replenishment at Point Mugu. So here you can see we have on sort of the western edge of the base, we have magazine storage areas and roadways that are constantly being assaulted by windblown sand. We'd like to take that and relocate it back onto the beach. And then we're looking at a potential sand source approximately a mile offshore in about 35 feet of water as a potential borrow site. We had been looking at some USGS reports about the material in this area, and it appears that there may be 20 to 30 feet of fine-grained sand material that may be suitable for beach replenishment. And with that, like I said, I would be short. I think we can, open it up for questions and discussion.
Thanks, Steve. That's some great background and some great potential coordination and cooperation to the regional sand management. So I think everyone's listening with real great interest to what you have to say and the role of the Navy working with the Army Corps of Engineers. And I appreciate everybody's patience today to listen to a lot of presentations and a lot of great information. We have recorded this session and we'll endeavor to have that available to people. I know there may be questions. I realize the time is already 10:55, and as in all planning meetings, real time is different than kind of game time, and we've taken the bulk of the meeting. But I would like to identify a couple of potential next steps that Beacon is considering as a way to kind of move the ball down the field, as it were, and to continue this coordination. Beacon is considering and planning for a kind of working white paper on regional sediment management within the littoral zone going forward. There's a lot of information. Dr. Patch provided a lot of information on the dredging history of all the ports. There are suggestions for improvement projects, and there are several living shoreline projects that have been proposed along the regional shoreline, including beach and dune restoration projects. So Beacon will endeavor to work with all the agencies to develop a white paper where we can take what we heard today and put it into a report that can be viewed by the Beacon Board of Directors and by all the interested stakeholders. The other thing that we would like to do as a follow-up to this meeting today, which follows on a meeting that we had in 2019, is to convene some of the principals that spoke today in kind of almost an ad hoc working group that could contribute to a white paper where we could assemble the data and then identify any gaps in information and science. That Dr. Patch again mentioned the issue of the sand bypass, the sand movement around Point Conception. And related is the sand movement, if any, around Point Magoo, and then the effect of the submarine canyons to act as sinks. And there is some additional science work that needs to be done. And Beacon has just impaneled a science advisory committee, and Dr. Patch is one of the co-chairs. So there are some next steps that we'd like to consider. And then because we heard about regional sediment management and the littoral cell as a whole, we'd like to take this meeting and make it a littoral wide, and maybe in the coming year have a Beacon Sand Summit, as it were, a bigger summit to understand the role of the different harbors and the opportunities for sand movement. And then because of what the Navy just mentioned, there is some interest in offshore sources of sand because sediment is becoming very dear and there's a lot of need, especially for the sea level rise adaptation. So those are some next steps that we're considering at Beacon. But we would be happy to entertain any other questions and or suggestions for actions that could be taken as a follow-up to this conversation today, which was a great conversation, I believe, and a great deal of information. And we will ask the presenters to provide their PowerPoints to us, and we will post them so that everyone has an opportunity to review the materials going forward.
Mark, may I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you. So one thing I think I learned today was that we would have a more efficient use of the air pollution credits if we were on an annual dredge basis or cycle. And the other thing that I hope that we could consider is to begin to evaluate alternatives to the way we've been doing it, because clearly the way we've been doing it for 40 years, I mean, it worked for the way we've been doing it for 70 years worked for the first like 40 years. And then it's kind of, because of inflation and rising costs, the amount of sand being moved is getting less and less and less. And then we're seeing the cumulative effect of that 32 million cubic yards of sand. So I think it would be really helpful if we could start to develop alternatives and try, and as many as we could identify might be a really great first step. And I think Kiki needs to be involved in everything we do. I really appreciated the information, and it's really, really cool to understand this regionally. But again, from the perspective of my city, we want a stable beach, and we do not want our infrastructure to be at risk. And I'm pretty sure that's the goal of the Navy down at Point Magoo as well. So thank you, everybody, for being patient. And there was a lot more that I wanted to say, and I wish I could have said, but I tried to keep my presentation to 5 minutes. So if anybody ever wants to talk about it, please give me a call, because I'd love to talk.
Mark, this is Gene Fisher with Regional Defense Partnership.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well,
Yes.
this was a great meeting for me. I particularly appreciated Kiki's presentation. It really was an educational opportunity for RDP. We've been trying to work closely in this area, and of course, you know, our interest is trying to support the Navy and Magoo and its issues, but we're into supporting anything we can throughout this issue. So one of the questions I have is something going to come out of this that would say how people like us who also lobby for these various issues, what should we be doing? Or are there issues that you could identify to us that we ought to be supporting in some manner? And that would be very helpful. Of course, we would like to be involved in any of this because it really impacts our ability at Point Magoo to maintain the range and the buildings that we're trying to get constructed there.
Thanks for your comments. And actually, to the degree that Beacon does put together a white paper, we'll be able to identify the role of stakeholders and interested parties and what role they can play. And certainly the Congresswoman spoke to that this morning in terms of the leadership that many different parties have to play in order to get the sufficient fiscal resources and the governance in place to do regional sediment management effectively. So your point's well taken. And yes, we'll follow up on that aspect of going forward. I see that we've gone shortly over 11 o'clock in the morning. I wanted again to thank you all for coming to this remote meeting today, for having patience as we organize the logistics of actually having all the presentations made effectively. Beacon welcomes the participation of all the agencies in its activities, as well as all the interested citizens. And we will continue to engage on these topics as forcefully as we can. We're kind of a small agency, but notwithstanding that, you have the support of the 8-member agencies at Beacon to continue these activities. So again, I want to thank everybody. Anybody has any comments they want to provide to Beacon, please do that directly to us. And Christina, I see you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Mark, for holding this. And I think the idea of having kind of a broader collaborative, you know, that we can get more done with a larger collaborative, I think is really important. And that, you know, off of Kiki's presentation, knowing that this isn't just small problems that we each have. This is a larger tied together issue that we need to all address together. And then again, to follow up on Mayor Gama's discussion about the air permits, that maybe we should bring in VCAPCD to have some discussions around some options and opportunities, whether as a collaborative, we're working together to find some air credits, or whether we as a collaborative push our contractors to have some different equipment or some modifications. I know VCAPCD has Carl Moyer programs that allow for some modifications to the equipment. Potentially having cleaner, greener equipment will allow for a longer duration to be able to do some of these programs and move more sediment. The other one I wanted to discuss that we had ended up having an issue with, and it sounds like Todd has the issue with as well, as the small sediment size. And I know Cal EPA has actually begun to change some of that criteria, and that that some of what was anticipated to be suitable material is no longer considered suitable. And that's unfortunate, because some of that material ended up going into a CAD cell and was now lost to the littoral drift and the beach replenishment. That if there is a balance to what the sediment size and that there's a, you know, a kind of a collaborative discussion around that, that maybe some of that smaller sediment size should be used and used in a different way, as opposed to disposing it in other locations. So those were two, outside of the funding and beach placement, I think those were two that I think are really important.
Todd, I see you have your hand up to make a comment as well.
Yeah, this is just to spring off of Mayor Gama's comments and Christina's comments. So as I mentioned before, Ventura maintains its own air quality permit. And just for reference, this in 2020, even though we moved maybe 450,000 cubic yards, we only used 1/3 of the fuel we were permitted to burn. So Manson, we write a letter to the Corps and to Manson, allowing Manson to use the permit. So Manson does not use their own permit when dredging our harbor. They use ours and they reimburse us. I wonder if, when, you know, in the conversation with talking to the air quality control office, if that permit could be broadened, more fuel could be added, because it sounds like, you know, that Susie had to spend some money on something that we, you know, we'll probably have leftover capacity in our permits. I mean, yes, you pay for it, but it's not an egregious amount of money. I think it was like $18,000 on a $2 million, you know, or on a $5.5 million project. I mean, that's nothing. So if that's a roadblock in future, maybe that's a bigger conversation for all of the ports and harbors to spring off of. Getting a new permit's impossible, but reusing a permit, modifying a permit might be easier.
No, point well taken. And I think as part of the regional sediment management discussion, we have this regional air permit discussion, almost like a transfer of, you know, development credit program, where we can operate under an umbrella. And certainly this will be a topic of the conversation Beacon will pursue as part of this white paper and working group approach. And Christina, to your point about the qualifying types of sediment and the use of fine sediment. So last Tuesday, Beacon was granted $450,000 grant by the Ocean Protection Council. And a good part of that money is going to go in a partnership with the USGS scientists who are studying the transport and fate of fine sediments to establish that, in fact, we should be able to use these fine sediments in our beach nourishment projects because they don't present the types of negative environmental impacts that we have judged them to be. That's outside of the contaminant issue. But as to the smothering and where they will go in real time, the USGS has advanced the science. And so we're going to partner with them over the next year and a half and bring that science to our littoral cell conversations. And as part of the grant, we're engaging with the regulatory community in a similar way to have these discussions. There's more interest now at the level of the state to consider a different mix. And Beacon had a permit for not 20% limit fines, but up to 35% limit fines that expired. So we're going to explore the reauthorization of that opportunistic beach sand permit. So we're on these topics, I believe, and you've identified the core issues that we still have to address. So we'll be getting back to you all to have you engage with us on these topics going forward. Anybody else had to make a comment while we're still on the Zoom this morning? Please just go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like. If not, again, I want to thank everybody for taking a good portion of their morning this morning to devote to this issue. I want to thank the presenters. A great series of presentations, really important information to get on the table. And again, Beacon thanks you all for your attention and your interest in the topic. And with that, then I guess I can call the meeting adjourned. And we'll be back to you all soon. Thanks again. I hope you stay safe and be well.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome all.